Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Mike Varshavski and I'm today's Man of the Hour.
Let's admit it, 2020 was more than just one for the books, but it shaped our lives in more ways than we could have ever imagined, my friends, but that doesn't mean we need to give up just yet. We have the opportunity to finish the year strong and continue taking care of ourselves and those around us, and I have the perfect guest right now with me today to introduce best practices on keeping safe, healthy, and resilient. Dr. Mike is a celebrity family medicine doctor whose online presence grew exponentially since he was named People Magazine's Sexiest Doctor Alive in 2015. He's here today to inform us on how we can continue to protect ourselves while we wait out this worldwide pandemic, and I'll tell you this Man of the Hour story is one I think will bring your spirits up as we wrap the year together. And here he is, Dr. Mike. It's so good to see you, buddy. We're about to finish the year off, and I couldn't have asked to bring a guest to the show and coin you the Man of the Hour as we're finishing off what I believe has been a hell of a year, but one that everybody's been learning a lot from. But how have you been doing, and how do you plan to finish off the year quite strong, my friend?
Hey, thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate you bringing me on to allow me to share my story. Honestly, it's been a wild story. It's been a wild year. I think everyone has had some level of struggle, and admitting that is a good first step to being kind to yourself. And I feel like as you and I continue talking today, we're going to realize that despite all the struggles, despite everything that's going on around us, what we must not forget is to think in scale, to think with nuance, and ultimately be kind to ourselves.
Man, and I think too, there's something about being kind and gentle and, realizing that there's a lot of pressure people are putting on themselves right now. You think of physical and mental well-being as a whole during the entirety of these pandemics. And the problem seems to be not only what's happening externally, but internally. And so for you, I think, I would be bliss not to ask you, when you're thinking about your physical and mental health over the past year, we can even start there. What has kept you grounded? Especially, we've been in the middle of New York City this whole time, most of the time even, right? I consider us neighbors on the
Yeah.
west side, but I think that there's something about keeping yourself grounded while all these external factors continue to happen. But what's been that for you?
Yeah. I think to say that I've been grounded this entire time is not exactly accurate.
Mm,
I've suffered. I've had struggles with my mental health. I think admitting that is really important in breaking that stigma down that exists right now, that we all have to be this resilient person that always bounces back from adversity.
yeah.
And sometimes it's okay to just say that you're having a hard time. And myself, as a frontline healthcare worker, there's been times where I've struggled. I didn't know the answers to certain problems. I've had to talk with patients that were going through a really rough time and not be able to give them the answers that I wanted to give them because
Yeah.
everything we're dealing with is so new. This virus on its own is a novel virus. It's completely new. We're learning on the go. We're making mistakes. I mean, how many times has the CDC said something and backtracked on it? Or even
Mm,
the Dr. Fauci, who I've had on my YouTube channel, amazing physician, speaks with humility, tells the truth, does not get political. But
mm,
still, in the beginning of this pandemic, him and I were saying, perhaps not everybody needs a mask. And then once we realized there were people spreading this virus who were not showing symptoms, we quickly realized we needed to change that guidance. So the fact that we are all learning in this process, doctors, scientists included, politicians included, really makes this a time where even someone like myself who looks like I'm doing a great job, I'm
sure.
on social media, I'm out there putting on a good smile, I've suffered. And
Yeah.
it's okay to say that. Something that has worked well for me over the last 8 months, 9 months has been the three good things. I don't know. Have you heard about that?
I haven't. Embrace us with it.
Yeah, it's basically something I learned from the field of positive psychology, where our minds are innately tuned to be anxious, to have a baseline level of anxiety in order to help us survive. In
Mm,
fact, that level of anxiety allowed us to be the humans today, because the people who were just always optimistic and dancing on the meadows while there were lions around,
mm,
they didn't make it here. So that level of baseline anxiety served us well at some points. However, during a time like this, where it becomes a chronic level of anxiety, it actually
mm,
starts working against you. And the way that you could reprogram your mind into not just constantly being in this anxious state is to remind yourself of positive things.
mm.
And it's easy to say, oh, just remind yourself of something positive and have it go in one ear and out the other. But if you do this 3 positive things at the end of every day, whether you
Mm,
write it on a piece of paper or on your phone, just documenting it in one way of 3 good things that happened that day, as well as one sentence about why it happened or why it made you happy, it really alerts your mind to the fact that not everything is falling apart.
mm,
And, it almost stems from the field of psychology when we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy is a field of psychology, it's a form of therapy in psychology
mm,
where we actually talk back to our irrational thoughts. And I'll give you an example of one of these irrational thoughts. If I do something wrong one time, it's easy for my thoughts to start saying I'm a failure. But failing in one thing does not mean you're a failure at everything.
mm,
However, in order to talk back to this thought and prevent it from having a spiral into a downward depression, we need to write something down on paper. Like, okay, I failed in this instance,
mm.
but I did well in instance 2 and 3. And that little reminder does not prevent you from feeling sad. We're supposed to feel sad at times. It prevents you or takes some of the power away from those negative, irrational thoughts and allows us to think in a more reasonable, logical way. It takes the lizard brain out of the equation. And I've been doing this 3 positive things for the last 8 months, and it really, truly does help. In fact,
Mm.
there's scientific research to show that it decreases anxiety and depressive symptoms, even in those who are clinically diagnosed.
And then an example of that would be what? So, for example, take you're having a rough day, you wake up anxious, and what would be a positive reminder you can tell yourself? And then I guess you're looking at kind of jumping out of that negative thought process because of it. What's an example?
Yeah, I try not to. I try and keep it scheduled and regimented. So at the end of every day,
Got it.
I would write the 3 good things down, and it could be something as small as my dog listened to me today, like it was obedient, or
Pooped where I
um,
told it should poop, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Or that, someone held the door for me today and they were kind, or someone wrote me a nice message. Or it could be
yeah.
something huge, like I got a promotion at work. Like it could be anything and anything.
Mm,
And the real power of it is not just writing it down, but it actually has effects weeks down the line because you're reprogramming your mind. You're not just writing these things aimlessly now. You're allowing your mind to
mm,
zoom out a little bit and not just focus on the negative things that are driving your anxiety, but on some of the good things that are going on.
mm,
In cognitive behavioral therapy, I mentioned earlier, we have these forms of irrational thinking, and one of them is called labeling. And we're very quick to label ourselves as failures when we mess up. We're quick to label someone as evil if they do something wrong.
yeah.
But it is really logically impossible to call someone all evil, all bad, a complete failure, because it just doesn't exist. They may be a failure at one thing. They may have failed mathematics, but they may be an amazing script writer. They may be an amazing doctor, but they fail in, some art and craft.
Mm.
So the fact that we should not be labeling individuals or even labeling ourselves goes a long way into taking the power away from these irrational thoughts.
Man. I mean, you start with mental health. We got to get straight to the physical stuff too, because I think
Of
during
course.
the pandemic, we're ignoring sometimes the fact that they're both able to be taken care of at the same time: mental health, physical health. So when we're thinking about immunity and staying ahead of our immune system and trying to be proactive in doing so, for example, I mean, that's been the biggest eye opener for me, at least, has been, all right, I have to drink a green juice every morning. I might drink an elderberry emergency once or twice a week or
Yeah.
whatever. You want to try to stay ahead of it more than we used to because we're not as busy. We can actually focus on it. And obviously you don't want to focus on it too much that it turns you a little bit too mental about it, right? But when thinking about staying ahead of our immune systems and being proactive so that we're not more likely to get sick, catch the COVID-19 virus, for example, then, what are some of those best practices?
Yeah. Right at the outset, we have to say that before we used to say mind and body, now
Mm,
it's mind body. So mental health and physical health are really intimately connected. And I'm not just talking about from, let's say, a nervous system perspective where your nerves are connected and they affect different parts of your body, but also through hormones and the
mm,
neuroendocrine system. So, for example, if I have a patient who's going through a really rough time, I will see mentally,
mhm,
I will see their physical health decline as well because they're not going to be getting good sleep. So they're not going to be healing and digesting as well because they're constantly on edge and they're sympathetic. Their fight or flight nervous system is going to be on overdrive. Their blood pressure is going to be high. Perhaps it brings about some autoimmune diseases that they've never had before, but are now triggered by this
Mm.
mental health stress. So what happens in your mental health will immediately have an effect on your physical health, and the other way around.
Wow.
Imagine, going through an injury where you lose a limb, perhaps. That's going to cause an effect on your mental health, at least in the short term. If we have well documented studies of individuals who have heart attacks, that depression often follows, and you have to actively think about that and think about what you can do. Same thing with cancer diagnoses. So
Mm.
these two mind body things are so intimately connected where they're actually just one. And when it comes to taking care of your immune system, you cannot ignore one side of the spectrum,
Mm.
because your immune system is such a complex system. And while we want to hack it, while we want to
Mm.
have all of these, biohackers out there creating supplements and tech that are going to, the watch that's going to tell us if our immune system is in tip top shape, we just aren't there yet. And we have to
Mm.
have that level of humility to admit it. Me as a doctor, the things that I focus on is, when it comes to immunity, is sleep, because
Mm.
we've known that if you don't get at least 6 hours of sleep, your natural killer cells, which are one of your first lines of defense, actually drop by a significant number.
Mm.
Making sure you're eating a varied, healthy diet, plant-based. When I say plant-based, I mean plant-focused. You don't have to go all
Mm.
the way vegan. Just making sure you're eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, so you're getting your vitamins, lean meats, healthy fats. Next, you want to exercise.
Mm.
Right now it's a little bit more difficult to exercise than it was before, but there's plenty of options, classes on YouTube, exercises you can do at home, perhaps outdoors where you're able to stay away from others. So, and the final one is keeping away from bad habits. And when I say
Mm.
bad habits, I mean smoking, heavy drinking, because all those also stunt your immune system as well.
Mm.
In addition, like, notice that these four things that I talked about, these four pillars, if you will, require some work, right? It's not easy to make sure you're getting good sleep. It's not easy
Sure.
to pay attention to your mental health or eat well or exercise. This takes motivation. It takes work. So what ends up happening, especially during a pandemic like this, it's happened before as well, but you'll have someone come in with a shortcut, the miracle product, the cure-all, this pill, this
Yeah.
potion that's
Sure.
going to make your immune system better. And it just honestly doesn't exist. We have no proof that it exists. We have questionable expert opinions that these things work. And in medicine, when we're judging the value of a recommendation, the lowest form of evidence is expert opinion. That's why we
Mm.
do randomized controlled studies, so that we have the gold standard. We have proof that something actually works. We compare it against the placebo. And
Mm.
all of these things that are promising to boost your immune system really fail that test, that litmus test of
Mm.
truth or not. And at the same time, they're also, you know, created by companies that are looking to make money in the midst of a pandemic, preying on folks' insecurities. And to me, I have a problem with that. And I know that budgets are very limited right now, especially in the patient population that I work with.
Mm.
I want to make sure they're spending their money and saving their money and using it where they're actually going to get documented health benefits.
Man, I get smarter listening to you. I would see you on broadcasts. I've tuned into your YouTube channel, and I'm always like, there's nothing like hearing Dr. Mike while he's on an open mic. You know what I mean? When it's
Yeah,
pre-produced, it's a different story. But man,
sure.
you're educating. We're gonna continue the education really quickly here. But the song "Baby, It's Cold Outside," right? It's holiday season. It is
Yep.
so exciting that the holidays are still able to come around during a time like this. Not like they wouldn't have, right? But we start to wonder what the hell the holidays are going to look like. And I think sometimes people overlook the fact that it's going to get cold no matter what. I mean, besides you look at the West Coast, coasters in general don't have to face that, but us New Yorkers do, for example, where it is getting cold around the country and around the world. What have been some major health risks that you've started seeing? And then how can we prevent some of those? For instance, because it's getting cold, X might happen to you in that scenario.
Well, let's take COVID outside of this
Yep.
spectrum for a second, because the danger that comes with COVID is really being indoors with groups of people,
Yeah.
because that's where the virus seems to spread most. That's why, like, there's a lot of protests that happened over the last 6 months, rightfully so, for a lot of injustices that have gone on.
Yep.
But we haven't really been able to see spikes as a result of those protests. Like in New York, there was, in the summer, I remember many protests going on, and we had a concern in the medical community that there would be a spike, and it didn't come. So it seems like the majority of the transmission really happens indoors.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense from the medical perspective.
Totally.
Even come a regular flu season, we see the same thing happening. That when people go indoors, germs have longer hang time where they actually
Mm-hmm.
stick around in the air for a few minutes to a couple of hours. And that's really the threat. But I'd like to also talk with you, Justin, about some really surprising dangers that come as a result of winter.
Yeah.
One of those is actually sunburns. And the fact that people think it's wintertime, what sunburn? How can that
Yeah.
happen? Well, UV rays are still present in our atmosphere that can cause the sunburn. Also, if there is snow on the ground, snow is reflective and it can actually reflect the UV rays back at you. That's why I have some friends that have gone skiing, for example, and
Yeah.
they come in and their face is completely sunburned because they did not cover up and use SPF. And while sunburn obviously raises the risk of skin cancers, it also increases and speeds up premature aging of the skin. And, we want to look good. We're spending a lot of time on Zoom calls. We're looking at ourselves. We want to be cognizant of that. So
Mm-hmm.
the recommendation there is to, when you're going outside, even though it's wintertime, still wear your SPF. That's really important.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is we always traditionally in wintertime see a spike in heart attacks when there is snow on the ground. Why? Well, people who have been sedentary for a period of time then go out to shovel the snow. They put themselves under tremendous physical exertion when they weren't ready for it, and it stresses their heart and it can lead to a heart attack. Now, there is an extra layer here where individuals are going to be wearing masks to shovel their snow. And we've actually seen evidence because when you're doing physical labor, you have to breathe at a faster pace. And when you're wearing a mask, you can breathe normally. It doesn't change your oxygen level. All this misinformation out there is not true. You keep your normal oxygen level. There's no carbon dioxide, any issues with that.
Sure.
But it does slow down it slows down the transfer of air if you're breathing really quickly. So what we have seen is those who are performing exercise or strenuous activity, their heart rate actually goes up 10 beats per minute if they are wearing a mask. And if you're a trained athlete or you're in good shape, that shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
However, if you are sedentary and you're going to exert yourself physically, which is already going to put a strain on your heart, know that by wearing a mask, it can increase that strain. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be wearing a mask. It means that individuals need to make a decision for themselves on what is right. Perhaps they can get help. They can pace themselves. They can take breaks. Just know that that risk does exist and make sure that you're not overstraining your heart, especially if you're not in proper shape or conditioning. Really treat it like starting a new exercise regimen.
I would say.
And the final one, which claims about 400 lives every year in the United States, not related to fires, is carbon monoxide poisoning. And this is a tricky one because it's not like you see smoke and you assume you have carbon monoxide poisoning. What happens is you start experiencing these really obscure symptoms that can be related to anything: headache, tiredness, nausea, and you won't even attribute it to something related to carbon monoxide. And what you could be experiencing is carbon monoxide poisoning. So what can you do to combat this? Making sure that all your vents and everything are properly opened and are not blocked, unobstructed. You want to make sure your carbon monoxide detectors in your home are up to date, that their batteries are changed, and keeping in mind that if you're going to be using a vehicle, that you do not stay in that vehicle for extended periods of time while the vehicle is running. Do not run it indoors in a garage setting, because those are ways where unfortunately people get sick or potentially even lose their lives completely as a result of this accident.
Man, doctor, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know unless someone like you brings it to light. And I would even think, I work out at the gym in the mornings and I have a thin mask. It's the, I guess there's a blue version. Now there's a black version. It's the thin paper-like one and sprinting sometimes with it on. And I think that obviously my heart rate is conditioned a little differently having been an athlete. But I think at the same time, it's harder because what you said, when you're starting to breathe faster and your body's working at a different capacity level, and that's on top of everything else you just mentioned too. You know what, Doc? Part of this particular show is we like to drive conversation with depth. And it's my favorite part of the show because, I mean, you just provided me with more insight that's going to take me throughout the rest of the year and get me super excited for 2021 because there's often this misconception that there is a new year and a new you, but you have to start taking care of you now. And so everything you've just said has been so insightful, Doc. But so here goes my favorite part of the interview, at least. And I think it's fascinating that we're going to be able to bring to light to the fact that you're not only influencing everyone that's been fortunate enough to have visited with you via online through your medical practices or what have you. But for starters, Mike, your name, your Instagram account, everything started back in 2015. Not had started, but really blew up, right, in the faces of the masses because People Magazine named you Sexiest Man Alive, and then articles were put out around that, and within minutes, days, weeks, you blew up. And from there, so much took off for you, right? And I wonder, though, if you've ever stopped to sit back and realize what's actually happening in my life. Because after all, in my perspective, I always say that life happens for us, not to us. And so with that slogan in mind, what do you believe has happened for Dr. Mike, at least since 2015, being named Sexiest Doctor Alive, and everything that's happened for you?
Yeah. Looking back at it, Justin, it's been, honestly, I don't do it enough. I don't look back enough because being a doctor, as someone who during that process was going through my residency training, you're constantly just focusing on the future and making sure that you're doing everything the right way. And you don't think about the successes that you've had. And honestly, that's something that I've tried to work on myself. I've done therapy talking about this. Something I talk about on my channel is being comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Like, so putting yourself out of your comfort zone. And I think I've learned to be really good at that. What I'm not good at is being comfortable, which is so unusual.
Break it down. What does that mean?
For example, I'm uncomfortable with comfort, meaning that like I've had these successes and I don't look back at them enough. I don't celebrate them enough. I'm constantly just stressed about the future or thinking about the future, and I don't spend enough time in the present. And that's honestly like the other edge of the spectrum, or the pendulum, if you will, that I need to do a better job of paying attention to, because truly there's a lot to celebrate here. This all started with this very superficial title of Sexiest Doctor Alive. And now we're at the point where between Facebook and YouTube, I've gotten 1 billion viewers with a B listening to health content that's evidence-based. I've partnered with organizations like the UN, nonprofits like AmeriCares and Susan G. Komen to raise mega funds to help individuals. Even at the beginning of this pandemic, because of my financial success, I was able to purchase N95 masks for my colleagues on my own. I was able to purchase scrubs for healthcare heroes, give back computers and money and funds. All of these opportunities came from this very superficial title that we then, with my very small team, have grown into something truly special. And my goal is to continue growing that, to continue putting out accurate information. At the same time, not forgetting and reminding folks at home that I'm human, that this is all a learning process. I am not like this, person that lives above everyone else. I mean, I was a broke immigrant coming to America that didn't speak English. My father went to medical school here a second time in the United States with a different language. Prior to 3 years ago, I was living with my dad in my mid-20s, and I was a resident working 80 to 100-hour weeks while still building the social media business. So reminding myself about that and not allowing some of the negativity that does exist online change that has been a big part of my growth as a human.
Hey everybody, your host Justin Crawford here, and I'm bringing you a proud message from our sponsors at Bluemon. Bluemon is a men's hair brand specializing in styling products started by the popular men's grooming YouTube creator Joseph Andrews, aka Bluemon. I'm excited to share that their latest Discovery Styling Kit is out right now and contains 5 hair styling products, all in a convenient travel size. But let's hear from one of their most satisfied customers right now.
What's up guys, my name is Harry. I like to slick my hair back. But the problem that I had is I have naturally dry hair. So I really needed a product that could not only offer me the hold that I need, but also a nourishing feature to stop my hair from getting too dry. So I use Fifth Sample Styling Mask Pomade. It gives me a high hold that I need, and its nourishing features keeps my hair soft and healthy.
I spent so much time trying to find the right product for my hair.
But with Blue Mon's Discovery Kit, you can now try their full range of styling products before deciding on your favorite.
Find the product for you.
Now, if he didn't convince you to make a purchase of that Discovery Styling Kit, I also want to offer you 10% off with our code REALTALK10 for 10% off at www.bluemon.com. And when you head to checkout, if you want 10% off, just use our code REALTALK10. What do you say about taking the first step for better hair today? Back to the episode we go. That's so humbling to hear too, because social media amplifies everything. You mentioned Facebook and YouTube, and then you have the Instagram account alone, right? There's a lot of exposure there, but media does something special, to your point about being able to then translate not only your expertise, but your givings to the world, and to be able to showcase that, do it differently. I'm sure partnerships have started on social for you. I'm sure direct messages that have been nothing but good things, opposite of the bad that you mentioned. A lot of it happens online, and that's the beauty of it. It's how we're able to do the Zoom call. We'll take this Zoom call and turn it into social content, and we'll have people inspired by what you just said alone, or educated by what you said at the top of this interview. But there's also a hefty balance that I'm sure you're going through as well, as you're still learning everything and reflecting with us now. But when people see Mr. Sexiest Doctor Alive, I would assume that a lot of times, they're drawn to the fact that you're Dr. Eye Candy more than you are a family doctor and someone who's an expert. But what's that been like, balancing both on your ends? One being who you are and what you look like, and then the other being your career and what you do.
Yeah, that's a great question. In the beginning, when that title first was bestowed upon me, I faced a crossroads because I was a resident. I was training. I was the youngest doctor in my hospital. When I was on the first week of medical school, they had an opening celebration party, and I wasn't invited. I was the only student not invited because I wasn't 21 yet.
Oh, come on.
So I was accomplishing so much. I've had some research published. I've written a chapter in a medical encyclopedia. So in that moment, I had to decide, what should I do with this? Should I completely stray away from this and say, oh, haha, that's cute, and move on and continue my training? Or could I use that and leverage this quote unquote scandal into an educational moment? So I'll go on the TV programs and they'll say, oh, we have the sexiest doctor. Who are you dating? Or what are you doing? And I'm like, well, that's all great, but I'm really excited about family medicine. I'm really excited about social inequalities in healthcare. I'm really excited about how lifestyle affects health, and how all these miracle cure-all products are BS. And let's talk about that. And somehow we've been lucky enough to do this. And Justin, I have to be honest, not everyone sees that. A lot of people do, and a lot of people are respectful. I mean, when you're on an airplane over the Atlantic Ocean and you save someone's life, MacGyvering their cardiac arrest kit to save a young man's life, people give you some credit for that. But at the same time, there's many people on social media who strive to either discredit me or to say, oh, he's just a pretty face. He just sells stuff on Instagram or whatever it is, even though it's not what I do. I have to remind myself where I came from, who I am as a person. I've had a lot of childhood struggles that I've actually not talked about publicly, that I'm looking to do so in the next year to connect better with my audience. The struggle of coming to another country, becoming a doctor at a young age. These things are not easy. Creating a business is not easy. And the fact that we have been able to accomplish this with so much positivity coming from it, we have to be able to understand that not everyone is going to be a fan, and really focus on the people who you can help, where you are doing the right thing, and really listen to your internal moral compass to make sure that you're not being swayed by the small amount of people who just will never agree or will never enjoy what it is that you're doing.
So eloquently said. And I bring that up because you have not always been this outspoken, open to public speaking fellow. At some point in your early childhood, I remember you opening up about it on a couple of outlets, that you didn't necessarily think you were going to have to be a public speaker at some point. You wanted to get into medicine. And to your point earlier about the scandal, for instance, having to amplify you as a personality more so than the expert. That's what I mean by there's two worlds here sometimes. And I don't know, I will even say that before asking you about public speaking, when you do come from another country and when you do have such an international background and full understanding of the world, especially because you are so well educated, sometimes when you get signed up to do like a, you know, Mr. Sexiest Doctor Alive, or, you know, whatever those might be for you in your lifetime, you fully understand that a lot of times it's just where the world sits in your lap and you've had to sign up for a lot of things. And sometimes it's out of your comfort zone, back to your point about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so with that, public speaking has a lot to do with almost everything with your YouTube channel and your public appearances. And you probably see so many patients throughout your career so far. But people who are hesitant of that, or either hate talking to people or are nervous to start the first conversation with anybody, has there been anything you've learned that we can then tell those folks who are, you know, taking a back seat on public speaking now?
Yeah, absolutely. And while you're being incredibly complimentary, I wouldn't like to say that I have full knowledge of the world because of my international
Yeah,
background. I think maybe perhaps I have a fuller knowledge because of,
sure.
you know, growing up in another country and then moving to the United States and living in all parts of New York, working in so many different hospital settings. I've done rotations pretty much across the US,
Yep.
seeing patients of different backgrounds. And growing up in New York just allows you to interact with a lot of different personalities, I'm sure.
Everybody, wait, can we
Yes.
talk about that, right? Like, you get on a subway train going from downtown to uptown, you're going to meet 500 people from everywhere, but yeah.
Exactly. And everyone has unique personalities and you
Yeah.
learn how to interact with them and you want to do better. And
Mm,
I think it makes you a more full person,
yeah.
not a completely full person, because I don't think anyone can be a full person, but
Mm.
we're striving for that. And being in New York, it really affords you those opportunities.
Oh, yeah.
For me, like you said, I wasn't the public speaker. I've had no media training when all this started. I didn't know how to go on TV or what to say, and it was all thrown upon me very quickly. But
Mm,
being a person who's read a lot of these books, you know, by Dale Carnegie, stepping outside of your comfort zone, making friends with people, those books motivated me to step outside my comfort zone in order to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
mm,
And being a doctor, I've realized that is one of the most important things you can do, because not only does it train your brain to not be afraid of just something that you don't know, it also reassures your brain that the next time you do it, that it might not be as bad.
mm,
So for example, a classic technique I would give to my patients who are afraid to do something is to write down on a scale of 1 to 10 before they do something, how worried they are about it. And
mm.
then after they do it, to write down the number of how bad it actually was. And almost always there's a discordance there where they would say, I had to give a presentation in class and I thought it was going to be a 10 out of 10, horrible.
Yeah.
And then they do it and it was actually like a 3, if that. And that sort of objective format of seeing your own objectivity of what you thought it was going to be like versus what it was like really sets you up and motivates you for the next challenge.
Mm,
Because there's this myth that exists about willpower and motivation, that you need to first have willpower. You need to first be motivated in order to do something, in order to go to the gym. But the reality of the fact is you actually need to go to the gym first, have a little bit of success,
yep.
meet some sort of challenge, and then the willpower and motivation comes.
Wow.
So that's what I urge anyone to do, that if you're thinking about doing something or you even wanted to do something or you're afraid to do something, do it and then see how it makes you feel and use the motivation and willpower that you get from it. Fill up that willpower tank, because our minds are just designed to thrive off meeting small challenges. The field of positive psychology, there's a great book titled Flow that teaches you that in order to feel this innate sense of fulfillment and well-being, you need to set small challenges for yourself. They need to be
Mm,
achievable challenges. Notice when you can have fun shooting a basketball from the foul line, and it
yeah.
makes no sense why you're having fun. There's no one else there. There's no competition.
Sure.
You're not doing this to make money. It's not for sexual gratification. These are the things that drive our lizard brains.
Yep.
But we do it, and there's some sort of innate sense of happiness. But
Sure.
now let me move you back all the way to the other foul line and have you chuck full court shots where you don't make a single one. That's not going to be fun. You have to set your challenges to a level where they're achievable, but still there is a challenge there. And a lot of times it takes a lot of introspection to figure out where that bar lands for
Hmm.
each individual.
Man. And it starts with not only today, but just doing it. Sometimes it's activating, period. And then you'll find a lot of things along the way that get you excited about that one thing. For example, public speaking. I remember I was in a spelling bee competition. I got like third place, but that was first time. And
Nice.
I used to get cold hands, for example. A lot of us do, right? Or sweaty
Hmm.
feet, if you may. And I
Yep.
remember I was like, yeah, I wasn't trained for this shit.
Yeah.
You just have to get on stage and do the
Yeah.
spelling bee. But no longer am I nervous because I found it got me excited. For example, same with you, right? Talking about the things that are helping people and influencing society because you have platforms now to do that, I'm sure gets you excited, which changes your perception quite a bit on public speaking, you
Of
know?
course. And I think um, it's important to just do it, almost taking like the Nike slogan, for
Come
example.
on. Where's Nike's ad? Pull them in here.
Yeah. My father, in helping me when I was a young gentleman growing up in New York, one of his sayings in Russian is called "Через не могу," and it translates directly in English to doing it through I can't, or do it through
Hmm.
I can't. And it's essentially the Nike slogan, if
I
you
was
will, for
going to
my
say
dad.
a different way of it.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to push through, but at the same time, that mentality might not work for everybody.
Sure.
And the reason it won't work for everybody is because everyone's mental health is slightly different, and they may be having some of those irrational thoughts that are preventing them from wanting to take this risk. And
Man.
those irrational thoughts cannot be dissuaded by, oh, just get over it. They need to be directly addressed. And that is why therapy is so important. That's why it's
Mm.
important to have a good support system, or a counselor, a doctor, a psychologist, someone around you that can help you work through that. For example, I had a patient, it's a longtime patient of mine 2 weeks ago, who wanted to begin an exercise regimen. She wanted to go to the gym,
Hmm.
but she was deathly afraid of working out because she thought everyone around her was going to judge her. And that because she didn't know what she was doing, everyone would be laughing at her. And if I'm thinking rationally, because I've spent a lot of times in gyms, that doesn't really happen. In fact, there's a camaraderie that exists in gyms that if you're in a gym, people are like, oh man, good job.
Yeah.
You're in the gym. You're
Right.
motivated. That's awesome. Let me help you out. Let me spot you. That's more likely what's going to happen in the gym. So only upon her vocalizing to me that this is what her concerns were, and
Mm.
being honest about it, and then asking her what she thought the reality would be and whether or not people would actually laugh at her, was she able to talk back to those thoughts. And now she's working out regularly in the gym
Mm.
and seeing tremendous gains from just herself figuring that out. It had nothing to do with me. I
Right.
was simply the guide that helped her get there.
Man, gains and gains, right? You
Exactly.
you use the perfect term there, dude.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, you know, there's a topic very close to your heart that I know, and something that often you reference as you continue this journey. Building incredible influence, as I mentioned, to society, and that's cancer. The very thing that took your late mother's life when you were still in med school. You know, cancer is something that seems so rare nowadays, and even today, still it's yet so common. So I know you've been advocating for cancer awareness and been working with foundations on such topics along the way in your journey. But what would you recommend to families today who kind of want to ensure that their loved ones can either avoid or get ahead of any cancerous possibilities in their body? As again, it's this one thing that seems so far away from, so far removed from anybody's life, yet it's such a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some cancers that we've done a great job in treating, in catching, and being preventive with. And while we want to say in the medical community we have all the answers, the reality is we don't have all the answers. And that's why it all comes back to that being comfortable with being uncomfortable, or being comfortable with the unknown. That's really the place we have to get to,
Mm,
because ultimately, if you lived a perfect healthy lifestyle, if you do all your cancer screenings, you get your vaccinations, you
mm,
go for all your checkups, it doesn't mean you could prevent all cases of cancer, or any
sure.
disease for that matter. The reality of the fact is there are certain things that are within your control,
Mm,
and those are the things I want patients focusing on. You cannot control who you were born to, your genetics. You cannot control your height. You cannot control so many of these variables. But what you can control is the foods you put in your body,
mm,
the exercise that you perform, your sleep habits, your mental health, at least from a therapy standpoint about
mm,
how to address mental health struggles. maintaining good social relationships. These are the things that are within your control. And obviously, as a doctor, I have to throw in going for your cancer screenings,
Of course.
having a good primary care doctor who can follow you, not over order tests, because there are true harms that come from over ordering tests or over screening for some cancers.
Huh.
So focusing on what you can control and then being comfortable with what you can't is ultimately what I think is a good definition of a healthy lifestyle. And there's some people out there, and I've struggled with this even recently myself, where it's like, well, if there's all these risks outside in the world and all these bad things that could happen, maybe I should just stay inside and not face these risks.
Sure.
The reality of the fact is, let's use relationships as a good example here. You know, there's individuals who do not want to be heartbroken.
Sure.
There's a fear, genuine fear of being heartbroken. And while I completely understand where that fear comes from and why it's horrible to break up in a relationship, and that could happen with anything or anybody, the fact that a spouse can cheat of 20 years, 30 years, all of these are true fears.
Sure.
The reality of the fact is that sucks. But another side of this reality is solitude sucks. Being alone sucks. So now you have to understand that just by ignoring the outside world or not putting yourself out there to be heartbroken, it's still going to suck and it's still going to eat you away, because we are social beings and we derive pleasure and fulfillment from social connections, from being sad at times and then being happy at times, from suffering at times to being ecstatic at times. And going through these challenges actually leads to a fulfilling life and allows you to sort of enjoy the ride, enjoy the process. And the one thing that I see, because I'm a family medicine doctor, I treat patients whether they're 1 day old or 101 years old. The elderly population, always their piece of feedback is to not be afraid to live your life. And whether that means going into a relationship and putting yourself at risk, exercising and doing these things where someone may laugh at you, going outside and taking calculated risks for what is appropriate to you, is what they all say. Because ultimately you want to get to a point where you've lived your life in a way that not that you don't have any regrets, but you don't have any regrets of being afraid of not doing something that you've always wanted to do.
It's refreshing to hear, you know, as we're still younger in our lives. Doc, you've embraced a lot, you've talked about a lot, and I would only assume that you can probably tell yourself sometimes that life happens really quickly, and that's something I will always attest to. I'm 24 years old and I think life happens so damn fast, right? It's why at the top of our conversation I mentioned 2020 is already over, right? Pandemic or not, the year happened really quickly. We adapted, we changed how we needed to. You've done so in such a way where you've managed to stay poised, confident, and poised, confident, and present, at least from the outside looking in. And I know you mentioned, you know, you're not this person sitting on a high horse above anybody else, and you have the same struggles everybody else does. There's no doubt in my mind, though, that your mother would be really proud of you for all that you're doing, what you've embraced since, you know, the scandal, as what you called it, you know, but there's nothing like a mother's love and a mother's pride in her child. But when you think of the hopes you have for what she's thinking of right now as she looks down on you, what would you hope that your mother's thinking about you?
My mom was always one of the nicest people, that even if someone wronged her, she would approach them with kindness. So I hope that she feels I'm living up to that standard, and that she is proud of the things that I've accomplished thus far, because I think they would be surprising to her. I don't think she would have expected this.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to just embracing everything that's in front of you. Which was social media. I wanted to tap on it really quickly with you, that you're a social media celebrity at this point, if not an icon in the world of what people are seeing just from Instagram alone. Let's use that as an example. And the rapid pace in which your brand gets exposed to people, especially now with the sponsorships and the real feature, there's just so much there. But I know that a lot of people in the world see social media as a fabricated or fake lifestyle, for example. So how do you make sure you're not getting caught up in that at all? Or if you have felt like you got caught up in it, how did you kind of get out of that?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of introspection that needs to happen. In the beginning, before even the 2015 popular viral moment, I I let social media get to my head. I thought that I was this cool, popular guy. I was going to be a doctor. The fact that I had, probably like 50,000 followers at that time, and I thought that was incredible. I would constantly show it to everybody and
Mm,
want to almost like flex the fact that I had this popularity.
yeah.
And that wasn't coming from like a show off perspective. It was genuinely coming from the fact that I grew up not popular. I grew up as an outcast, skinny kid
Yeah.
that no one really liked. So it was crazy to have this acceptance. But I knew that even though those were my intentions or my thoughts, that's not how I was being perceived. And that's not how it was coming off. It
Mm,
was coming off as really douchey, arrogant, and I needed to recenter myself. And I actually deleted Instagram, not the actual Instagram, but the app off my phone
yeah.
for a period of time to recalibrate and figure out why it was I was doing what I was doing.
Hmm.
And after those 2 weeks, I was able to say, well, look, I see a lot of benefit in social media for the future of my patients. I have some benefit here to show med students that we're humans, that we can live a life and go through med school. And I said, let me try it and see
Hmm.
what happens. And it's tricky because you constantly have to adapt and you constantly have to read negative critique if you want to get better, because there's always some level of truth to the critique. I look at my Instagram page and I'm always smiling in all my pictures,
Yeah, I was
which is
gonna say.
great
Yeah.
because you want people to feed off of that positive energy. You want to give that to the world. But at the same time, you want to share your struggles as well, because not only relatable, but it validates their own existence, that doctors can struggle too, that we all have mental health struggles.
Hmm.
And that's something I'm going to be focusing moving on into the future. Like I said, sharing things about my past, my childhood, connecting more with my audience in a more meaningful way, where it's not just positivity, it's sort of the harsh reality in an optimistic way, if you will.
That's the title of your book, dude. That's
I
actually genius.
actually wanted to. I've written a few pages of a potential book,
Oh
and
man.
the title of the book is "Life as a Metaphor," because whenever I speak about health, for example, like when I talk about white blood cells, I always
Sure.
create some sort of metaphor as if, oh, these are the linebackers and they're preventing
Yeah.
the virus from getting into the end zone or whatever it is. And I always bring it back to some sort of metaphor.
Yep.
And I feel like that's how I've lived my life thus far. And I think it would be a cool book to write if I ever find the time to finally finish
Oh, you heard it first here on the Men of the
it.
Hour, man. I think you'll find the time. You found the time to do a lot so far, buddy, and
Yeah.
it's inspiring to see. I got a last few questions for you before I ask my very last one. But you mentioned always smiling on social media. You give a lot of your audiences, most of the time, a gentle smile and a dose of optimism, from what I would call it. But what keeps you optimistic, all things considered, especially this year when you're looking back on it, and then looking forward, at least, right? Optimism is all about perspective and perception. For instance, what keeps you optimistic?
One is history. I use history as a guide to see everything we've overcome as humanity. And I try to zoom out and think in scale, which is
Mm,
something we said in the beginning of this conversation, that it's very difficult to think about 320 million people. Like I can't even fathom what that looks like or what it feels like, or how many
right.
different opinions are there and how many people who have done something bad and good. And we can't think about that well.
Mm,
So when I'm trying to think in scale, I'm zooming out. Okay, what have we survived over 100 years? What have we survived over 1,000 years? What we have survived over a millennia, and
yeah.
what it means. So that gives me optimism, the fact that we have overcome so much. And the second thing is, call me naive, but I believe in the human spirit and resilience, that I think ultimately humans are good. They would rather cooperate rather than compete.
Mm,
And I genuinely believe that there is good in this world. And I think it will surpass any kind of negativity or struggles that we may have along the way. And there will be
mm,
struggles, there will be losses. There will be people who have succumbed to this virus, succumbed to the stresses of COVID-19 pandemic. And that's the reality. And that's the harsh reality. But the
mm.
harsh reality with a dose of optimism is that we will overcome as a society. We will learn from it, and we will be better humans in 2021 and beyond.
Dr. Mike, that's why I knew we would become friends. Trust me when I say I do not want this conversation to end, but it's the Men of the Hour. It can't go over. No, I'm kidding. Got to stick to the hour mark, my friend. No, but
Sure.
you've given us so much of your time already, and I thank you for it. I do not want the conversation to end, but I do have one final question for you. So take us back as you have already alluded to quite a bit, but if there was one thing you wish you knew on the first day that BuzzFeed published that article of you and your cute Husky Online article, that pretty much started everything. It was a ripple effect from there, blew your name up, changed your life forever. What would the one thing be if you knew something then that you now know?
That's a good question. I would tell myself to enjoy the ride more, because genuinely, I think it was all really stressful, and I didn't derive as much positivity as I should have from the amazingness that it was. That the fact that all these things were happening at the same time, that we were making such progress, and I wasn't thinking in scale, and I wasn't living in the moment, and I wish I did that more. So that's what I would tell myself if I could rewind to that August 2015.
Oh man, that was the day. And like I don't think it was a scandal. I mean, we talked about it. I think there was a reason things happened to us. I mentioned it earlier in the interview. Life's not happening to us, it's happening for us. And sometimes that's the beauty of life. And your life is, from my perspective, even, I told you, I almost met you before we did this, and we would have collided in a different way should we have not set up this particular interview, Dr. Mike. And just by looking at you, knowing your story now, and as much as you have opened up on this particular show, and again, it goes back to the fact that you do everything you do with grace, hard work, optimism, and I know that from everything you've said, we can at least go in with a little bit more resilience and optimism and hope that we end the year strong together as a community. For everybody that's listening, I think too, it starts with perception and perspective first and foremost, but also going back to what Doc said earlier about just doing it, right? And then finding the passion and what you actually want to be doing from there. But I think, again, it all starts with today and getting ahead of your immune system. It starts with staying ahead of your physical health. And again, back to the cancerous points of just making sure you're getting checked all the time. Doctor, I could recap this entire conversation, but it would probably take me another hour. So I really do want to thank you again for joining the Men of the Hour podcast and really defining what it means to be a man of the hour. So I really appreciate you.
Justin, thank you so much. And I think the audience and myself owes you a debt of gratitude for even doing a podcast like this, for giving people hope during a dark time, because the last thing we want is for folks to embrace extreme social isolation. That's not what this pandemic is about. You know, we give these guidelines of social distancing, not traveling during certain times, wearing a mask. These are general guidelines, and we want people to follow them. But extreme social isolation on its own is also deadly. So the fact that you're bringing these conversations to people, that's a form of social connection. The fact that we have the ability to Zoom call each other, to FaceTime, to use our Instagram apps, our YouTube apps. These are all instances of ways that we can stay connected. And you're doing an amazing job connecting individuals and allowing people like me to share their story. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, I appreciate you, buddy. Happy holidays. Happy, healthy holidays to you.
Thank you.
And cheers to a new year. I think it'll be a fine one if we just remain optimistic, man.
Appreciate that. As always, stay happy and healthy.
Justin Crawford here, and I'll be back next week with another great guest on the Men of the Hour podcast. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review right here and anywhere else you'd like to listen. Also, check out our Instagram and YouTube channels when you get a chance and see the full video interviews with our guests at Men of the Hour podcast. Thanks for listening. Now get out there and make a positive change for yourself and those around you.